Hello, young ladies and young gentlemen. We continue our series of YouTube lectures on applied computer science. Now, as you probably know, we've already covered several YouTube lectures that cover values, variable names, and assignment statements. So we have lots of practice with values, variable names, and assignment statements. But today, I'd like to move on to the if-else statement. And if I have time, either the while loop or the for loop. But first, the if-else statement. Okay, so here I have x equals 7 and y equal 8. Okay, now this is not, look at this, x equal y. This is not an assignment statement. It's two punctuation characters. You type in equal twice. See that? These are two punctuation characters. Please be careful about the difference between an assignment statement where you type this once and the test for equality where you type the same punctuation character twice. Beginner level programmers always make that mistake, confusing the two, and that's one of the first bugs you'll have to fix in your code. More about that later. Okay, so x equals 7 and y equal 8 in preparation for showing you the if-else statement. So the if-else statement, I do a test condition that evaluates to true or false, and if it's true, I execute this subblock of code here, which is just one line of code, so equal 3. I evaluate this Boolean expression that evaluates to true or false here, and if it evaluates to false, I execute the other subblock of code, which in this case is just one line of code, but it could be more. So this expression evaluates to either true or false. If it's true, do this. And this could be more than one line of code, but in this case it's just one line of code. If it's false, then execute this. This is a subblock of statements that you execute, and in this case it's just one line of code, but it could be several lines of code inside the else subblock. And then to see the results of what you're doing, you print out C afterwards just by doing print C. That's usually the syntax. In Ruby it's puts C, P-U-T-S, but it's similar. Okay, now a lot hinges on this. The if keyword is followed by an expression that has to evaluate to either true or false. Whether you do this code or that code depends to whether this evaluates to true or false. This is an expression. This is not an assignment statement. This is a test for equality. This is an equality test operator. So the expression has to be evaluated. We do expression evaluation. And x is equal to y? Yes, no. X equal y evaluates to 7 equal 8. That, of course, evaluates to false. This evaluates to false, which means this does not get executed, but this does get executed. So when you print out C, you will get 10, not 3. Okay, now let's cover a little bit of details that this points to. One is this is an expression. This is an expression. You have to go through the process of expression evaluation. And for simple examples, it's very intuitive and you can just practice with it, and I suggest you do it. The process by which expression evaluation occurs, the subtle details become more important for more complicated expressions. But this process is expression evaluation until you get a single value, which in this case is either going to be true or false. And the if-else statement executes one section of code or another section of code depending upon whether this initial test expression evaluates to true or false. Okay, now when you come to expression evaluation, there's a little more, there's a question about what does that actually mean, and we'll cover that later in other YouTube lectures. But for simple expressions, you kind of will figure it out intuitively. I also need to cover the syntax. The syntax, this is just kind of pseudo-English. This is kind of English-like syntax, but the syntax will differ. For Python, it looks like this, although I think you need to have a colon after this. For Ruby, you do need to have an end keyword to tell where subblocks of code begin and end. So for Ruby, you do need to have the end keyword so that you know that this subblock of code ends after just one line of code. And if there was no else section here, you would need to have an end keyword right here to note that this subblock of code is only one line of code and not 2 or 3. Okay, let's see what else. All right, I think I have time to very quickly point out a while or for loop. X equals 0, sum equals 0. I don't care about this. That's just a preparation for what I want to actually show you. While x less than 10, I do the following. Okay, this is a single block of code. It's 2 lines of code. It's 2 lines of code, but it's a single block of code, and you have to have precise syntax, depending on whether it's C or Python or Ruby, to tell the computer that this is to be treated as a single block of code in the context of the while loop. In the case of Ruby, you do that with the end keyword. That's the end keyword, but note that that is specific to the Ruby language. It differs from language to language. All that says is this while loop has to have a subblock of code. That subblock of code could be 1 line or 2 lines or 3 lines, and you have to have a precise way of telling the computer where the subblock of code ends. And that's your subblock of code here. Okay, you should be able to figure out what happens here. X starts off at 0. Okay, I execute this subblock only when this evaluates to true. Okay, so when this evaluates to false, I stop. So while x is less than 10, while x is still less than 10, this gets executed. Okay, but when I reach the time point at which x is equal to 10, this becomes false. This does not execute. Done. You stop. What this actually will result, you probably can figure out, is that what this will result in is that sum becomes 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus so on plus 9, but not including 10. So you start off with x is 0. Is 0 less than 10? Yes, go ahead. Sum is equal to sum plus 0. Boom. X is equal to x plus 1. X is equal to 1. Okay, now go back to the top of the loop. 1 less than 10? True. Sum is equal to sum plus 1. You've added 1 to it. Increase x by 1. X is now 2. Go back to the top of the loop. 2 less than 10, and so on and so on. Eventually, x is 9. So at some point, x is 9, and so we get while 9 less than 10, true, 9 is less than 10. Sum is equal to sum plus 9. X is equal to 9 plus 1, 10. Now look, go back to the top of the loop. 10 less than 10, false. Do not execute this. This does not get executed. You're done. That is why the sum does not get the value 10 added. The last value that's added to sum is 9 and not 10. You see how this works? Okay, so you have if statements, if else statements. You also have loops, which can be either while loops or for loops. And you learn about these after spending several days practicing with the earlier stuff, which is values, variable names, and assignment statements. We'll continue more about if else statements and while loops and for loops in a later YouTube lecture. Thank you.